Today I'm happy to introduce Connie Kassor, Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at Lawrence University. Connie teaches courses on Buddhist thought and Asian religious traditions, and her research focuses on Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And she's the author of a bunch of really amazing sounding articles, including The Contexts of Correct Seeing, Truth and Fiction in Tibetan Madhyamaka, Gorampa Sonam Sengye on the Refutation of the Four Extremes, and Buddhism in American prisons, for example. Today she's going to talk to us about how to organize time to prioritize research. She'll tell us about doing a time audit, about setting expectations for yourself in terms of how to spend your time, and then about how to make and keep a plan. I learned a lot from this article and look forward to implementing some of these tips, and so I hope you enjoy this too.
Hi, I'm Connie Kassor, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I organize my time. Specifically, I want to talk about how I make time to prioritize research and writing among all of the other things I'm expected to do in my job. If you end up in a full-time teaching gig after you finish your graduate program, or if you end up cobbling some adjunct positions together, it's really easy to end up in a situation where you feel like you don't have any time to write. Your days get sucked up by teaching and grading and committee meetings, and it's a common occurrence to get to the end of a day or the end of a week or the end of a semester and realize I haven't gotten any research or writing done. But as we all know, scholarship is an essential part of the job for many of us, and keeping up with research and writing are important tasks. So before we get into things, I just want to start with a couple of caveats. I am a single person without any children or caretaking responsibilities. I'm in a tenure-track position at a teaching-focused small liberal arts college where I generally teach about 2 courses at a time, and I average somewhere between 10 and 30 undergraduates in each class. So what I'm about to show you is what works for me in my own particular situation. Your own circumstances might not be the same as mine, especially if you have to work multiple jobs or take care of other people, or if you just have other commitments in your life. You might hear my cat in the background, one of the benefits of working from home. Anyway, what I think that I can offer you here is still helpful, and you can take some of these strategies and make them work for you. So I think the first step in managing your time is to figure out how much of it you actually have, or maybe how much of it you want to have. Personally, I don't work more than 40 hours in a week as a general rule. To the extent that I'm able, I don't work on evenings or weekends. I don't check email, I don't grade papers, I don't do anything during my time when I'm not working. I realize that this might seem controversial in our culture of overwork, but we don't get paid overtime in academia. So I choose to devote 40 hours to work each week. And that's a finite amount of time, and I need to make a plan for how I choose to use that time. You might be willing or able to work more, or you might have to work less in any given week, but just start out by understanding how much time you're devoting to work in any given week. Before I make a plan, I like to conduct a sort of time audit to see how I'm currently spending my time. Then once I understand how I'm currently spending my time, then I can think in concrete terms in terms of what I'm expected to do in my job and what I expect of myself. And then I make a plan that matches those expectations with my reality. So first, we'll talk about the importance of a time audit. This is a helpful way to see where your time is going. Here's why I think a time audit is important. On a typical Monday, this might be what my calendar looks like. Class in the morning for an hour and 10 minutes, another class in the afternoon for an hour and 10 minutes, and then a committee meeting for an hour. So that adds up to 3 hours and 20 minutes of scheduled time where I actually have to be somewhere. Seems like this would leave plenty of time for writing. But often I find that if I don't make a plan and budget my time, I get to the end of a day like this and I've gotten next to no writing done. If this sounds familiar, which I'm assuming it might for many of you, I think the most helpful thing to do is to conduct a time audit and figure out how you're actually spending your time. So here's my suggestion. For a week or two, pay attention to how you spend your time without making any changes to your schedule. Just keep a notebook or a text document with you at all times throughout the day and write down what you're doing with your day. So to take that Monday as an example, here's how I might have actually spent it. Get to my office around 9 o'clock, say hi to some colleagues in the hallway. And then when I sit down, I realize that my office computer needs to run updates and restart. So I go down to the cafe at the campus center to get a cup of coffee while I wait for that to happen. At 9:45, I reply to a few emails. And then at 10, I start preparing for my morning class. Takes me some time to walk across campus to get to class, so I leave 10 minutes early. I teach, and then after class, I stick around for about 15 minutes to answer questions from students about the upcoming exam, walk back to my office, take half an hour to eat lunch, answer a few more emails, and then it's time for my afternoon class. So again, I walk across campus to class, I teach, and then I have a window of about half an hour. It's not enough time to go back to my office before my 3:30 meeting. So I walk to the cafe across the street and I run into a colleague and we have a conversation about planning an upcoming event that we're working on. Then I have a committee meeting, get back to my office, and at 4:45, I sit down to grade some papers. And the next thing I know, it's 6 o'clock and I'm wondering, where did my day go and why have I only graded 2 papers? Just do this every day for 1, maybe 2 weeks. Don't make any judgments or beat yourself up about how you're spending your time. Just treat this time audit like, contemporary mindfulness meditation. Just observe non-judgmentally. Once you've got a week or two of data, sort your working time into categories to just start to break things up a little bit. I like to use 3 categories: teaching, research, and service/miscellaneous. I use these categories because these are the categories that the tenure and reappointment committee will use to evaluate me when I go up for tenure at the end of this year. If you're in a situation where other things are more important, or you don't have a service component to your job, or there are other things that you need to keep track of, you can change these categories accordingly. So next, what I do is I take my log of how I've spent all of my time and I add up all of the time according to each of the categories. So if we look at this sample Monday, you can see that I spent 4 hours and 55 minutes doing teaching related activities. We could just round that up to 5 hours. I spent 1 hour doing service in a committee meeting. And I spent 1 hour answering emails and planning an event with my colleague who I ran into. So I'll categorize that as miscellaneous. And the rest of my day was spent eating lunch, getting coffee, chatting with colleagues, walking across campus. So I don't count any of that as work time. But you can see this still adds up to 7 hours of focused, dedicated work for this particular day. I think that's a pretty good day of work. So continue like this for each working day for the week or the 2 weeks that you've done your time audit, and tally up all of the hours in each category. So I won't show you the other days in this hypothetical week, but you could see, by the end of the week, it might look like this: 23 and a half hours of teaching, 11 and a half hours answering emails and meetings or doing the service and miscellaneous activities, and 5 hours of writing. So this adds up to 40 hours of solid, focused work for the week. At first glance, it's pretty obvious that I spent a lot of time teaching this week and not much time writing. But we'll get back to that in a little bit. So now we'll move on to the expectations. After you do the time audit, the next step is to think about the expectations for your job. What's expected of you currently in your position, and what do you expect for yourself? So personally, I'm going up for tenure in a few months, so my goals are revolving around that at the moment. And at my institution, teaching, service, and research are weighted more or less equally in a tenure evaluation. So ideally, I should be devoting roughly equal time to each of these 3 categories. So in a 40-hour work week, this means I should be spending roughly 13 hours on teaching, 13 hours on service-related activities, and 13 hours on scholarship. In reality, I can probably get away with a little less time on service, which is why I lump miscellaneous activities like answering emails in with this in my time audit. So now I'm clear on my reality in terms of how I'm currently spending my time, and I'm clear on my expectations in terms of how I should be spending my time given my priorities and my responsibilities. So the next step is to look at both of these two together and try to engineer my reality to be more in line with my expectations in terms of how I'm spending my time. So in my time audit, I discovered that I spent 23 and a half hours doing teaching related tasks, 11 and a half hours doing service and miscellaneous activity, and 5 hours doing writing and research. Now, if I really want to get tenure, I need to be devoting more time to the writing and research category. So I have two ways to do this. I can work late and on the weekends to make up for this lost research time, or I can try to devote a little less time to that teaching category. And again, in this line of work, we don't get overtime pay, so I prefer the second option to giving up my evenings and weekends, if I can at all make that happen. But it's important to understand you have a finite number of hours in any given week. So the trick is really to figure out how to align your expectations with your reality. I should point out that in your first year or two of a tenure track teaching gig, this equal division of time might not be realistic. Teaching a brand new course for the first time is really time consuming. So it's perfectly okay if you need to allocate more time in your first couple of years on the tenure track focusing on teaching. This is, in fact, why new positions often involve a course release or lower service expectations in the first year. Teaching gets easier and demands much less time after you've already taught a course once or twice. So in your first year or two out of grad school, you might find that you need to spend closer to 50 or 60% of your time in any given week on teaching. That's perfectly okay. The point is you just need to be aware of your time, and you need to make sure that you're still carving out a reasonable amount of time for scholarship, whatever you decide that reasonable amount of time is for you. Once you've set your plan in terms of the number of hours you have to devote to certain categories every week, you can start to plug those different hours into your schedule. So I rely really heavily on my calendar for this part of the process. Every Sunday evening, I take about half an hour to plan out my week. So I sit down, I open up my calendar, and I add things to my calendar in terms of priority. So first, I add in all of the non-negotiable time. So that's classes, meetings, appointments, and lunch. Yes, I consider lunch a non-negotiable event. Next, I plan out my writing and research time. And once I have this on my calendar, I treat this as non-negotiable also. I find that protecting my writing time is the only way that I can get writing done in the midst of a busy week. And once that writing time is on my calendar, I treat it just like I would treat any other meeting. I don't schedule anything else during that time. I close my office door. I put my phone on airplane mode. I do my best writing in the morning, so I try to factor that into my schedule whenever I can. Then I schedule the rest of my available teaching time. So preparing for classes, grading papers, meetings that might have to happen outside of office hours. One tip that I've found that helps me to avoid over-preparing for class is I like to schedule my class prep time immediately before the class meets. This might sound anxiety-inducing. It was for me when I first started doing this, but I found that it sets a hard limit to when I have to stop preparing for class, and it goes a long way towards saving time. And it makes sure that I don't over-prepare. I think a lot of us do that, especially in the first few years of teaching. So once all that's on my calendar, then what's left is I schedule any other service-related or miscellaneous tasks, things like answering emails, committee work. I plan out breaks, like breaks for coffee, breaks to go out and take a walk if the weather's nice. I think breaks are really important. And I find that if I don't schedule those into my day, I don't often take them. So once my schedule is all set for the week, I try to follow that as closely as I can. But things always come up, a last minute student with a meeting who can't make it to my office hours, or the copier in the office runs out of toner and I have to go across campus to the library to make copies. Things happen. So what I try to do is just make a note of these things. And at the end of every day, I just kind of adjust on my calendar to have it reflect how I actually spent that day. So my calendar is kind of a planning tool and a diary in a certain sense. So everything that's in the past, I have a record of what I did that day. This is also helpful for when you have to submit materials for, say, reappointment or tenure. You can look back over your calendar and get a better sense of things that you accomplished in any particular period of time. So at the end of every week, what I try to do, ideally on like Friday afternoon or as close to Friday afternoon as possible, I look over my calendar and I note the hours that I spent in each category that week. So maybe I discover I spent a little longer than I expected reading students' essays, and I'm taking longer than I initially planned with grading this particular assignment. Maybe that means I send out an email to my class to just let them know their papers will be handed back later than expected. But most importantly, what I do is I look over my schedule to make sure that I really did treat my writing and research time as fixed commitments. For me, I think writing a little bit every day, even if I can only squeeze in 30 minutes on the busiest days, it works so much better than doing all of my writing on 1 or 2 days in a week. So when I sit down to plan my next week, I look over my expectations and my reality, and I ask myself, what can I do differently next week? And so then I try to plan my schedule to reflect that. At the end of every month, I do a monthly review as well, seeing if my teaching, research, and service roughly equal out to my goal percentages. A heavy teaching week might need to happen here and there, or a heavy research week might need to happen if I have something that's coming up. And so things can kind of fluctuate from week to week. But if I look back over my time and I find that I only spent 10% of my time on research last month, I can recognize that I need to shift some things around when I plan for the next month. One of the biggest benefits of this strategy for me is that when I pay attention to how I'm spending my time, I learn things about how I work. I've learned that it often takes me longer than I think it will to write an article. And it often takes me longer than I think it should to grade students' papers. I've also learned things like I can get away with checking my email once in the morning and once in the late afternoon, and that I don't need to be constantly interrupted by the ding of my email client throughout the day. So I schedule that time for reading emails. So I hope that some of this has been helpful for you. I think really what time management all comes down to is having a plan so that your reality and your expectations are aligned, and being flexible when that plan needs to change. And please make sure you take some days off and get some sleep.